Just waiting for the other guest. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. It's my great privilege to moderate this very important discussion the day after peace and security in Israel and Palestine. My name is Sanam Vakil. I am the director of Chatham House's Middle East North Africa program. And I'm joined by a really distinguished panel that I'm going to introduce momentarily, just to remind you that we're on the record, we are being recorded, and I very much invite you to please tweet at hashtag #CHLondon. We will come to the floor and to those online, and we're very keen to make this interactive and involve you and ask questions. But I want to kick off by turning to our panel. I'm going to introduce them as they're going to speak and give them an opportunity to share some thoughts. We curated this conversation many months ago where we hoped that we would be already focused on the day after. And obviously, almost 9 months on, this war is still very much ongoing. So there is a lot to cover. And let me introduce our panelists that have been kind enough to give us their time today. We're joined online by Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who is a member of the Palestinian Parliament, also a presidential candidate in 2005, General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative, very active as a grassroots leader, a campaigner for the development of civil society and democracy. His full bio is in the packet, but I'm just reading some highlights, so we're grateful that he's joining us as well. Ksenia Svetlova is the Executive Director of ROPES, an important organization that stands for the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics, and Security, and she's going to tell us more about her work. Ksenia is also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Middle East program, and she's a former member of the Israeli Knesset, and she's a prolific writer and thinker and investing heavily in this conflict and thinking about solutions. Welcome to His Royal Highness Prince Khalid bin Bandar bin Sultan bin Abdulaziz. He is the Saudi ambassador here in London, and we're grateful for his time. In addition to the work and his position that he's been holding here for a number of years, he's worked at the United Nations, the U.S. State Department's planning staff. So thank you all for being here. And Dr. Barghouti, I'm going to start with you and ask you to kick off and share some thoughts about the landscape in Palestine. You've been working and commenting for the past number of months, but you've been involved as a Palestinian political leader, and we're very keen to hear from you how and what is needed from your vantage point in order to get to a ceasefire. Negotiations continue to languish. Tens of thousands of people have been killed, hostages remain in captivity, and the conflict looks very, very stuck for the time being. So keen to hear your views and have you kick off the conversation.
So much. I had some problem with the sound before, but I hope it stays good. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all the audience for attending today. I want to start by
perhaps if there's some connectivity problems, we can pivot and allow Dr. Barghouti with some time to connect. Very stuck in Israel, and then if you have any thoughts on what will move the political landscape, that would be very helpful.
Thank you so much, Sanam, and thank you for having me today. It's June 20, but for many Israelis, it's still October the 7th. People are still reliving every single day the horror of this day and the uncertainty that came after that. With the ongoing war in Gaza, with the populations in the south and in the north that are not longer living in the south and in the north, whole areas were depopulated, perhaps for the first time in the history of the country. With unpopular government and cabinet that seems even less popular today after Benny Gantz, the leader of the opposition, decided to leave the ranks of this ultra-right-wing government. With demonstrations that are rocking our country almost every single day now, because the June, I don't know if you're aware, but the Israeli opposition decided that June will be it will be the month that the most pressure will be put on the government, and of course it will continue, to July and so on. But nevertheless, there is still no date for new elections. There was a feeling, Sanam, a few months ago, I think maybe in January, after the operation in Khan Yunis was concluded, that the country is about to find its new way through new elections that will take place out of the necessity to, first of all, dissolve the current government, to find a new way to regain trust between Israel and its closest allies, the United States and European countries and some Arab countries as well. None of this had happened so far. And it seems that Netanyahu, although still unpopular in the polls and with the majority of the population still willing to go for early elections as soon as possible, is still able to control the political scene and to perhaps even survive. Well, we don't know what tomorrow will bring, but certainly we survive till the end of this year. We are looking till the end of 2024 and perhaps going into 2025 with the same composition of the government. And there is, of course, an unexpected development that might happen very soon. And this is, of course, the war in the north, which is looming. And it seems that the Israeli public that was really heavily hit by the war that was erupted by 10/7 became numb to the understanding that its world might be shaken completely, because the world in the north with Hezbollah will look very differently from the one that we are having right now with Hamas. And just today, a few hours ago, the head of the governmental company that is in charge of prevention of crisis in the sphere of electricity said that Israel is not ready to this war. The war in the north. There will not be electricity, perhaps for weeks or longer. This is the expectations. And if you're taking all of this together, you have this climate of uncertainty. I would say fear, but it's not even fear, it's desperation. It's desperation because it seems that there are no ways out. There is no solution. There is no opportunity for this ceasefire. And at the same time, we all know very well that there is a solution, that it's out there, that the region is basically waiting with its hand turned towards Israel, where at the same time the Israeli government right now is unable to take the courageous call, to make the courageous call and to end the war, release the hostages, to stabilize the situation in the north, as much as possible, and to try to work with the region on the general stabilization of the situation, end of conflict, and transition to a post-conflict Middle East.
Thank you, Ksenia. You've presented a very real picture of the landscape in Israel, and I want to get to the issue of Israel and Lebanon, but I would like to park that if we can, and just ask you a quick follow-up question. How much support in Israel among the Israeli opposition is there for this ceasefire deal that President Biden has put forward, having worked with members of the Israeli cabinet and Netanyahu himself? Is there momentum for that ceasefire if the alternative is a broader war, potentially one that is really devastating?
Well, we see it on both sides, on the Israeli side and on Palestinian side. According to the polls, you have the most populist elements gaining power You have the most despicable politicians who actually, offer populism and nothing more, gaining more and more trust, from those who don't know what to look for anymore. And at the same time, I have to tell you that the situation in Israel is complex. The picture is not black and white. You have hundreds of thousands every Saturday night, but also now during the days, who are demanding ceasefire. They're demanding early elections, but they also demand ceasefire and the release of the hostages. We are talking about a very substantial chunk of the Israeli population, the active part of the Israeli civil society at its best. We see how it demonstrates its power, its ability, its vigor, and it is putting on the table the very uncomfortable truth, something that nobody in Israel is happy to hear, that in order to release the hostages today, in order to seek way out, yes, you need to do some unpopular steps today. So at this one part, if you're looking at the traditional political circles, you will not find there much support for this deal. And nobody is open actually to speak about it openly, even though, President Biden said clearly that it was an Israeli proposition. It was not his own words. It was something that Netanyahu discussed and proposed. But if you are looking at the publics, then you see, there is much more pragmatism that on the political level. There are people who understand that today, this is something that Israel, unfortunately, will have to acknowledge. In order to get better, it first needs to take a step back to repair things.
Thank you very much. Are tech situations improved? Do we have Dr. Barghouti online? Okay, well, Your Royal Highness, thank you for being here, and grateful that you've given us some of your time. Perhaps you can reflect on the Saudi landscape, and normalization, particularly between Saudi Arabia and Israel, has been a huge part of day-after scenarios. And while we are not yet there, perhaps you could walk us through the thinking in Riyadh as to how important the prospect of normalization is, and what sort of commitments Saudi Arabia is willing to make to Palestinian self-determination, if not statehood. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Normalization is important to Saudi Arabia and to everyone in the region and anyone who's sensible, because it brings peace, stability, and security. And if you look at our region, it's the lion's paw, but it has a number of thorns, and it has one big thorn that covers all others. And until we remove it, it's difficult to remove the other thorns. And the big thorn is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. However, within that, people don't often listen to what we say in Saudi Arabia, and they hear that side of the argument, and that's true. But we will not normalize at the cost of the Palestinian people and their self-determination and their state. And I get asked that question regularly, and I keep reminding everyone, we recognize a Palestinian state. So it's not about creating one. We believe it already exists. It's about getting the rest of the world to join that. Now, within that, we have, we are Bedouin, we are pragmatic, we are realistic. And if you look at the region, what often escapes us is responsibility. And it's not the responsibility for where we are that I think is the problem. Because if we go down that rabbit hole, we never come out. It's the responsibility that the people in the region, and in particular the parties to the conflict, have to find a solution. Because the Arab-Israeli conflict throughout history affects the world in a way other conflicts don't. Whether you like it or not, whether it's fair or not, is irrelevant. It is a reality. People here in the United States, across Asia and in South America, have a tie and an emotional link to this conflict in a way that other conflicts don't bring about. And so there's a responsibility because it's international. That's on one side. On the other side, if what is happening in Gaza continues to keep happening, we are moving down a path that I fear will soon become irreversible. We are every event that suddenly comes up, we hit an inflection, a turning point where things get worse and we get further away from a solution. The problem is, every time we hit that point, it's not a linear progression, it's by an order of magnitude. And where we struggle is, we don't know when we will hit these points along the path, and we don't know by what order of magnitude we get further away from a solution. And so what we end up with is these big jumps in finding a solution. And the further we get away, the more people lose hope. The more people lose hope, the less likely we have a solution. And at some stage, we will hit a point where the conflict will spread and it will become regional. And I think it's very important for everyone to recognize the danger that lies ahead. People forget how serious that could be. A regional conflict will not remain regional. It will become international very quickly. And once we recognize how dangerous that is, it puts into perspective the work we have to do. Now, within that, the responsibility comes for those involved to realize we have to make decisions that take into account everyone else's security, stability, and their future. Whether they like it or not, is it fair for a Palestinian to have to give up what they want for the rest of the world? No. Is it fair for an Israeli to have to make a decision that affects everyone else? No. But that's the reality. And we can deal with the world that we live in or the one we would like to live in. But the reality, if this continues along the path it is going, is much worse than what is happening on the ground today or any possible scenario that may come from a deal. So in order to protect everyone, we've all got to make sacrifices, and I think, sadly, for those involved, the biggest sacrifices have to be made for the rest of us. And this is where we are. And for us, coming from harsh climate history, we make sacrifices for the community at the cost of the individual. And that's an unfortunate reality of where we are. Sacrifices must be made in order for everyone to benefit. But you look at the world that exists thereafter, it's a much, much more positive world for everyone in the region. And it means that Israel should be part of it shouldn't be playing football in Europe, it should be playing football in the Middle East. It shouldn't be doing cultural events in Europe, it should be doing them in the Middle East. But Israel has to make that decision for itself. I think if you look at going back to the Arab peace plan, we've made that offer. But it's a big step, and I recognize that. But until that step is made, I'm not sure how far we get into discussing the day after, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. And I would like to come back to you to pick up on some of these issues, because integration means cultural people to people, and there's a lot that we can pick up on. But let me turn to Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who is unfortunately only on audio, but we'll take what we can get. Dr. Mustafa, thank you for your patience. We're very keen to hear from you as someone who has been leading and engaging as a political figure and an activist on the Palestinian side. Where and how does this conflict move forward? We don't hear enough, I think, about Palestinian views and perspectives, and I'm very keen to hear yours. What are people talking about on the ground? What do people envision, and what do you envision as to what comes next?
Well, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
And oh, great. And I thank you for inviting me, and thank the audience for attending today. There are specific points I'd like to make clear. First of all, 7th of October was a result, not a cause. And if we stick only to 7th of October and forget the conditions that led to it, we will be in trouble. Palestinians have been subjected to ethnic cleansing since 1948. There are 7 million refugees who are displaced and not allowed to come home. Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem have been subjected to the longest military occupation in modern history, 57 years. And it transformed into a system of apartheid that is much worse than any other apartheid system ever. And in the middle of all of that, we had a consistent effort by Mr. Netanyahu to marginalize completely the Palestinian issue. And he had the guts to stand up in the United Nations General Assembly showing the map of Israel that includes the annexation of West Bank, Gaza Strip, and Golan Heights. What we need today immediately to get to talk about the next day is three things. First of all, complete and total ceasefire. The continuation of this war is absolutely harmful for everybody. Second, Israeli army must withdraw from Gaza. And third, there has to be a national consensus Palestinian government that is interim in nature to sustain the unity between West Bank and Gaza and to prepare for future democratic elections. Now, Israel cannot, and the United States can't, no other party can impose on Palestinians who should lead them. Palestinians have the right to choose their leaders democratically. And had we have the elections that were planned in 2021, we would not be in this situation today. The elections in 2021 were unfortunately obstructed by Israel, were not supported by the United States. And had we have these elections, and if we can have elections next year, let's say, no single party, according to all polls, no single party in Palestine can get absolute majority. We will end up with a democratic, pluralistic system, which is exactly what Palestinians need since a long time. Third point, Israel, in my opinion, is in the worst type of leadership today in all its history. Not only because Israel now is accused by the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court of committing three horrible war crimes in parallel. The war crime of genocide, which has taken the lives of at least 37,000 Palestinians in Gaza up till now, including no less than 16,000 children, but also the war crime of ethnic cleansing and the war crime of collective punishment, including using starvation as a weapon of war. Israel also is in a deep leadership crisis. We've never seen such a bad management of any war before. And in my opinion, this is related to three factors. First of all, one of the major motivating factors of the decisions that are made is revenge. Second, for the first time, we see fascist ministers sitting in the cabinet of the Israeli government, people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who don't shy away from, like Smotrich calling himself a fascist homophobe, and who say that settlements should fill the West Bank so that Palestinians should lose any hope of a state of their own, and then have to choose between leaving, which is ethnic cleansing, or accept a life of subjugation to Israelis, which is apartheid, or die, which is genocide. The other one, Ben-Gvir, says Israel must occupy all of Gaza Strip and then ethnically cleanse everybody. These are ministers in the Israeli government. Finally, my last point is that this whole crisis cannot be resolved without dealing with the main issue, the main question. How can Palestinians have self-determination? Today, there are more than 7 million Palestinians living on the land of historic Palestine, with more than 7 million Jewish Israelis, almost equal to each other. What could be the solution? It could be either two-state solution, which requires that Israel removes its illegal settlements by international law from the West Bank and allow Palestinians to have a sovereign, real, contiguous state. Or it should be one democratic state where we all live together with equal rights and equal opportunities. Two states or one state. The problem is that most Israeli leaders, the vast majority of Israeli leaders, refuse two-state solution and refuse one-state solution. So what is the message that Palestinians are getting? It's that the Israeli solution is ethnic cleansing of Palestinians who live on their land. That is the main problem, in my opinion, and we would not have had this terrible situation if the international community itself hadn't failed, actually, in pushing for a real solution. And we would not be in this situation if the American administration in particular was not so hesitant so reluctant in taking any role in pushing for a true peaceful resolution? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barghouti. You've been very clear, and I think this is a perfect opening to bring in Aaron David Miller, who has been heavily involved, invested, and very vocal about the role of the United States in this conflict. From my vantage point sitting in London, all conversations go back to Washington, Aaron, with critique of the Biden administration for maybe not doing enough, for not pressing enough. How do you see things? Is the onus on Washington right now? What do we expect in the coming months? Can the Biden administration do more? I leave it to you to pick up on any of these issues.
Thanks, Sanam. Unfortunately, I couldn't hear much of what Ksenia had to say, and it's great to be here with Mustafa, Ksenia, you and the Saudi ambassador. Look, I'll make 4 points. I'm not here to, my days of trying to fix things, I had 27 years in the Department of State under half a dozen secretaries of state. When I left the State Department, Colin Powell gave me 2 pieces of advice. This was in 2003. Don't ever try to come back. I took that literally. I had no interest. And the other piece of advice he gave me was don't ever try to look back. I rejected that wholeheartedly. I've spent the last 20 plus years in the public conversation trying to figure out, look at the world the way it is, not the way Americans or any other external actor wants it to be. So I have 4 basic points I'll make. They're my words, they're annoyingly negative points. I haven't lost hope. I think that's unconscionable. I have 2 grown children. I cannot say to an Israeli or a Palestinian or a Saudi or even to my own countrymen that never. I think that's morally unconscionable. But let me make 4 points. Number 1, and I have to remind myself of this every single day. I'm a historian by training, but never really practiced. But it's worth pointing out that the Middle East is literally littered with the remains of great powers who believed wrongly they could impose their schemes, their dreams, their aspirations, their will on smaller ones. And in a conflict where the 2 major combatants, and they are the principal drivers of this conflict, they set the tone, they set the prospects for escalation and de-escalation. It is their ambitions, their motives, their interests that have defined the nature of what happened on October 7th. In a conflict such as this, where it is perceived to be existential or near existential, I would argue to you it's a structural issue here. The influence of external parties on such actors in an effort to fundamentally alter the trajectory of their interests is very limited, very limited. And we're in the 9th month of this war next month, despite the ICC, the ICJ, the United Nations, the United States. The inability of the vaunted international community, reflected in the divisions, self-interests of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, reflected in the reality that it is rare for the international community ever to act in concert on anything. I'll just give you a brief example on mass killing and genocide. The Holocaust, Cambodia, Darfur, Rwanda, Congo, Syria, the Uyghurs, even in Ukraine. So the notion somehow that, and I'm asked this every single day, why can't the United States make this stop? That's point number 1. Number 2, I think it's fair to say that over the course of the last 8 or 9 months, the Biden administration has been reluctant, unwilling, unable to impose a single cost or consequence on the policies of the Netanyahu government, some of which they object to, that normal humans would regard as sustained or serious pressure. I mean, that's a fact. There's a reason for that. There are several reasons, and I'm happy to go into them in the Q&A as far as what drives the Biden administration. And again, these are not This is not a situational issue. The explanation for the absence of pressure on Israel is structural. We can talk about it as to why that is. Number three, the day after. And let me be very clear here. I understand and I am sympathetic to the aspirations of those who look at this conflict as a point of departure, first for creating a new reality in Gaza and then moving on, as the administration would like to do, the Saudi ambassador referenced this, to a broader set of regional policies that might stabilize the region and even focus in a way that's equitable and durable on resolving the Israeli-Palestinian issue. But those aspirations right now, 9 months, almost 9 months into this conflict, are far better suited to a galaxy far, far away than they are to the realities back here on planet Earth. And there are 3 of them. And I have no solutions to them. And when I ask administration officials whether they have them, yes, they have aspirational plans. Are they tailored to reality? Number one, Hamas is going to survive either as an insurgency or, given the weakness and divisions in Palestinian national politics, as a vibrant player, not only in whatever post-October reality exists for Gaza, but in the broader Palestinian context as well. We can talk about Israeli transgressions all day long, and there are many of them. And Mustafa rightly pointed out that this conflict did not begin on October 7th. But the one constant reality on the Palestinian side for which I have no answer, and I'm sure there's an explanation, is that without one gun, one authority, and one negotiating partner, one gun, one authority, one negotiating partner, and strategy, it seems almost impossible to imagine not only a post-conflict situation that improves what's happening in Gaza, but in the broader Palestinian context. So that's number one. Number two is the reality that there is no Palestinian governing structure right now that has the legitimacy or the capacity. The administration uses the term revitalized Palestinian Authority. I understand what they like to do, but Mustafa is 100% right. Palestinians will have to decide for themselves, and the closer the United States gets, the more fingerprints it leaves in terms of trying to affect who will govern in Palestine post-conflict, the less chance we're going to have of creating a legitimate, the less prospect Palestinians are going to have for creating the kind of leadership that they need. But I'll come back to it. One gun, one authority, one negotiating partner.
Thank you.
Finally,
okay.
Finally, the Israelis. Without a security structure, a security architecture that somehow replaces what we've seen since 2007, the Israelis will continue to operate at some level in Gaza. And I see no way right now, Arab boots on the ground, international security force, all of this stuff is aspirational to say the least. One last point. What really terrifies me is that at the end of this conflict, Israelis and Palestinians are going to look at each other and they're going to say, you know, the problem is not that we don't understand one another. The problem is we understand one another only too well. And the space for moving forward is terrifyingly small.
Thank you, Aaron. That's been very sober and realistic, and I think we've heard from everyone that we have to assess the situation as it is, not how we want it to be. I want to bring in some questions and then go back to the panel immediately. Please.
Hello? Yeah. Thank you so much. My name is Jasmine El Gamal. I am a former Middle East advisor at the Department of Defense in the U.S. And currently an independent political analyst. I want to go to something Aaron actually ended with, which is about the way forward and how Israelis and Palestinians are going to view each other looking forward. Every day since October 7th, I feel like we have moved farther and farther away from the ability to have a conversation about the other's suffering, the other's trauma, the other's reality. And this is not a criticism, it's just an observation. In your opening statements, Ms. Svetlana and Dr. Barghouti, you each talked about, your perspectives, the Israeli perspective and the Palestinian perspective. Now, I was in a meeting with Israeli and Palestinian peace builders recently, and the message from both sides was, we are lonely, we are underfunded, we are attacked by all sides, and we don't have the support we need to bring other people together. So my question is, how do you support the peace builders? How do you support those voices, both from inside Israel and inside Palestine? And then for His Royal Highness, do you see a role for Saudi Arabia in that, given the prospect of normalization, including cultural normalization, to bring those two sides together and not have it be a zero-sum game?
Thank you. I'm going to take a few more and then go back to the panel. The gentleman here who has his hand up, yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Kamal Mohamedou. I'm a student at UCL and on the Common Futures program here at Chatham House. So several discussions today have seemed to focus on the growing influence of new mediators. And to that end, there seems to be this heightened focus on international law with organizations like the ICJ, the ICC that are increasingly in the spotlight. And I think one observation that we can make is that this kind of contrasts with the past, where nations, often the US acting as a kind of, quote, honest broker, were more dominant in mediating tensions between Palestine and Israel. And given this shift and this growing focus on international law, my question to the panel is, do you think that organizations like the ICJ, like the ICC, represent new momentum and a new solution in resolving this issue? And do you think these entities are counteracting the influence of major powers or simply contributing to the ongoing diplomatic efforts? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to take one last question from the audience. Mr. Paris, just up here. Thank you.
Hi, Jonathan Paris, former Middle East Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. My question is directed to Aaron David Miller. Do you think, looking back, that the opportunity with Yasser Arafat, who then had control, had one gun, etc., was missed, and that we didn't push quite hard enough, we being Washington and the international community and the Israelis themselves, to take the opportunity to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict at the time when the United States was the true unipolar power in the world?
Thank you very much. I think we'll perhaps go in reverse order, if you don't mind. I'll start with Dr. Barghouti. You're online, I hope. You're still with us?
I am. Yes.
Okay, if you wanted to pick up on the issues of how better to support peace, the role of mediators, and really how to move forward in this moment. I know you're in Beirut also, if I can bring that in. The war does seem to be on the precipice of expanding, perhaps for the third time over the past 9 months. If you have any reflections on that, that would also be welcome.
Yes, thank you. I will start with that, actually. It is very clear that if the war on Gaza does not stop immediately, the war will expand. And you will see a terrible situation, as was mentioned by Aaron, I think. The war could expand and include not only Lebanon, but a continuation of the confrontation with Yemen. And other parties. This could become very dangerous regional expanded war. And that's why I think all pressure much must be put on Netanyahu's government to stop this war, to truly accept the United Nations resolution. They never really accepted it. So the risk is there, and everybody can feel it. On another issue, how we can support peace builders. We can support peace builders by talking about real peace. not artificial peace. Real peace means that Israel must end its occupation of occupied territories. People don't speak about that. They keep speaking about how to normalize relations. They don't speak about the root problem. I am a medical person by education and practice. And in my medical practice, I know very well that the best way to kill the patients is to concentrate on the symptoms and not the cause. One should look at the cause of the disease, and the cause of the problem in the area is the fact that Israel continues to occupy Palestinian people and prevent them from having their right of self-determination, having their right of freedom. And Palestinians and Arabs in general, and many, many people in the world are asking the big question, why do we see this double standard? When you compare the Western countries' positions in Ukraine, where 11,000 sanctions were imposed on Russia in less than 2 months, but in the case of Israel, they are supporting the occupying power. That is the problem.
Dr. Barghouti.
One last point, if you allow me just to respond to the issue of unified leadership. One gun, one leadership, and one negotiating partner. I totally agree with that. Well, that's what Palestinians need. That's what we've been calling for 20 years. A unified Palestinian leadership. But we cannot have a unified Palestinian leadership without allowing the Palestinian people to democratically elect their leaders. We did not have elections since 2006, and that is wrong. So if people accept our right to practice democracy like every other people in the world, we will end up, of course, with a unified leadership. We cannot, of course, wait now till we have elections. And that's why the solution is an interim unified leadership where all groups could join the PLO, and PLO will be presenting everybody, but with a democratically structured leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ksenia, I want to turn to you, and perhaps you can also talk about the supports of peace, the mediators, the work that you do, albeit very briefly because we are under a time pressure.
Well, I will start with very single fundamental point. The peace builders need to be safe. They need to be protected. They need to know that when they will come to their respective countries, they will not be intimidated by powers who want to destroy it all, like they were, for example, many times by the Hamas. I know people who flew Gaza in the recent years because they were engaging in peace-building efforts with the Israelis. And then they were ratted, by some others to the Hamas, and they were intimidated, and they had to run. So unless we will provide some ground to bring these people together without some of them being killed after that, this is something that I would say will be, it will be something that very, very helpful. Another thing that we found in our work, and we are bringing in my organization that I lead, ROPES, we bring together forward-thinking youth who believe, young leaders, youth who believe in two-state solution and in full integration of Israel and Palestine in the Middle East. We bring them together and we discuss practical things, like how the day after will be looking like, when there will be independent state of Palestine next to the state of Israel, not instead of it. And I can tell you the dynamics change tremendously when we have a regional component within us, when it's not only Israelis and Palestinians, when they feel that there is a support with the region, Saudi Arabia, United Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, other countries that are part, I would not say just the normalizing, they are part of peace. Let's stop using the word normalizing. This is peace. The only borders, the safe borders that Israel has today, it's the peace borders. It's with countries like Egypt and Jordan. So the only borders in the future that it will have, that they will enjoy peace, security with the Palestinians, they will be agreed borders. So in this regard, when you put these elements that already achieved some kind of breakthrough with Israel in the room, Palestinians feel much more secure. Israelis feel that they have somebody else to talk to about the difficult points. And if you just can allow just the last point, I think that this is crucial when we're discussing leaderships. So I've heard from a distinguished Palestinian speaker, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who is a friend, I know him for many years, a lot of criticism and rightful criticism on the Israeli government. I have not yet heard one word about Hamas. So if you are not addressing the other part of the fascist government and fascist element inside this government, and you are just say, well, there is a problem with the Israeli government. There obviously is. But let's agree that we should not have fascist elements in any government, in Palestine or in Israel. And this is something that can bring us perhaps to the shores of moderation and to the safe shore of resuming the negotiation and the solution that we are actually seeking for. And again, the region has to play an active role. We are grateful for the Arab Peace Initiative that was, at the time, it was proposed by Saudi Arabia and adopted by the whole Arab world. Unfortunately, the region and, of course, the international community did not do much about it during these years. This is time. The initiative is still on the table. We can get it today and start working on it right now, not waiting for the day after. Why wait?
Yes.
We can do it in the next hour if you want.
Thank you very much. Aaron, over to you to very quickly take up this issue of Yasser Arafat and one gun and, what could be done differently this time?
Look, to John Paris's question, and maybe I'm too reductionist on this, but I continue to believe in the power of human agency to change things. And what has been missing, it seems to me, in the Israeli-Palestinian context, are leaders who are masters of their politics, not prisoners of their ideologies. Leaders who are willing, not because of external pressure, because they fundamentally understand that the needs of the so-called other, and Goethe's definition of a tragedy fits the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's competing justices. And on the 5 core issues, Jerusalem border security, refugees, and end of all conflict and claims, Camp David, July of 2000, might have been a lost opportunity, but I do not believe that any Israeli and Palestinian leader then, including Ehud Barak, who put some extremely, I would describe them as, in comparison to his predecessors, almost heroic proposals on the table. Neither Israelis nor Palestinians nor Americans were willing to make the kinds of decisions required to produce a conflict-ending solution. And that remains in my judgment. You need a Mandela, a de Klerk, Sadat and a Begin, a King Hussein, a Rabin, even Yasser Arafat in his first incarnation. Leaders who are willing to take hard decisions. I don't see them. And that, to me, is much of the problem.
Thank you, Aaron. Your Royal Highness, no pressure. Everyone does continue to look to Saudi Arabia as a leader and incentivizer and a country that remains committed to the credible, irrevocable peace. If you could take up Jasmine's question on what more Saudi Arabia can do. The Crown Prince made a very strong statement 48 hours ago that was not heard by the international media. Maybe you can reiterate and express quickly, albeit the kingdom's views again.
Sure. First of all, there is no question Saudi Arabia is one of the most important countries in the region. For it not to play a role would be silly. It's also important to recognize our position, which has never changed, despite people never listening to us, is that we believe in the creation of a Palestinian state and a solution to the conflict. Now, if it was easy, we would have done it by now. But without that, normalization is irrelevant. There is no point having normalization because we will still have conflict. And conflict is the problem. It's not the normalization that's the issue. But there's a great leverage that Saudi has in opening up the Arab and Muslim world to the state of Israel. But Israel needs to play as well. And part of the price of playing is finding a solution to the Palestinians' plight, which is a state, an independent state. And, Dr. Mustafa said it very well. There's no point in discussing everything else until we find a solution to the basic issue is what do we do with the conflict? 1 state, 2 states, whatever it is. Once we do that, everything else is on the table. But the Crown Prince's position, Saudi Arabia's position, His Majesty's position, our government's position, and the will of almost every Saudi that I know is we need a Palestinian state. The offer was made in the Arab Peace Initiative. 67 borders, Palestinian state, 2-state solution, we all live happily ever after. But it goes back to 1982. King Fahd presented the same offer. It has not been taken up. And I find it mystifying. Forget about the actors in the game who are who are working not just with their hearts, their emotions, their gut, their head, their intelligence. All of this is playing into their motivations, but the rest of the world is being given what they're asking for and nobody's following it up. And I find that really, really quite astonishing. And here we are again. The Crown Prince stated very clearly, we need a ceasefire, an irreversible solution for the Palestinians, and then there's peace everywhere. It wasn't even reported. And it's annoying and frustrating for us because the world assumes something totally different, and that's not helping the situation. So I think we all start to need listening to each other and focusing, as Aaron said, on the reality, not the world we'd like to live in. It's irrelevant. That's great for academic discussions, but we need to find solutions in the real world. And in the real world, we need to make sacrifices and all compromise for each other. And until we do that, we're not going anywhere very far.
Thank you. Sorry to have kept you a bit longer and gone over time. This was a very important discussion to have, and I think that you've heard the real key issues on the table. You've also heard some provocative thinking. So thank you very much to the panelists for joining us from all parts of the globe. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for listening. Please join me in thanking them.